The Nintendo 64 was the console I grew up with, and at the time, at least for me, the controller was one of the coolest things about the 64-bit console. The analog stick felt like a major leap forward, and the three-pronged design was certainly quirky, but it was also iconic. All these years later, I find the Nintendo 64 controller has aged fairly poorly compared to other retro counterparts, and very few of those original joysticks have withstood the test of time. And that brings us to the topic of today's video, a modernized wireless Nintendo 64 controller with one major standout feature, built-in rumble. So here is the Tribute64 2.4 GHz wireless controller from Retrobit, and full disclosure, Retrobit sent this to me for free, but all opinions of it are my own. And real quick, if you're new here, make sure to subscribe so you can stay up to date on everything happening with the channel. And with that out of the way, let's take a look. So the Tribute64 isn't the first Nintendo 64 controller that Retrobit has made. There was a previous wired version of the Tribute64 available for either original Nintendo 64 hardware or USB devices. The design borrowed heavily from the highly regarded but somewhat difficult to find HoriPad Mini, one of the first third-party Nintendo 64 controllers to eliminate the middle prong and move the analog stick up and to the left above the D-pad. But even though this new wireless version of the Tribute64 bears the same name as its predecessor, it does feature a bit of a redesign as well. Even though I've never held the original wired version, I believe the wireless Tribute64 is a bit larger overall, and you can see the analog stick is moved a bit higher and the D-pad farther over to the left. For a quick specs rundown, the new Tribute64 features a rechargeable 500 mAh battery via USB-C, which should give you around 15 to 20 hours of playtime with rumble and around 30 hours without. The wireless Tribute64 utilizes a 2.4 GHz wireless connection with a range of around 30 feet and will also enter sleep mode after around 5 minutes of inactivity. And beyond extra added home and select buttons, there are also a few macro options listed in the manual that will allow you to alter button inputs depending on which device you're using it with. The wireless Tribute64 has a price tag of $39.99 and is available in 3 colors: Atomic Purple, Classic Gray, the one you're seeing here, and then a special edition Black Ultra 64 version that matches the design of the Nintendo 64's prototype controller. And as far as overall feel goes, the Tribute64 is great. It definitely retains a bit of a retro feel overall, but the buttons all feel really nice, and the analog stick is a major upgrade. It's got good accuracy, and I really like the grip of the ribbed soft rubber cap. I do wish the LNR and ZL-ZR buttons didn't sit quite so flush though, and were a little more pronounced. And in case you were wondering, ZL and ZR simply function as dual Z buttons, a redesign that makes perfect sense as far as placement, and obviously because you no longer have the middle prong that the Z button used to call home. A little while back, I reviewed another wireless Nintendo 64 controller, the Brawler 64 from Retro Fighters, and I will say I think I prefer the overall shape of the Brawler 64. It just feels fuller in the hand and more ergonomic, and I appreciate its more pronounced triggers. I do also like the feel of the slight matte finish on the Brawler 64 as well, but overall I definitely think the buttons and analog stick feel better and closer to the original in the right way on the Tribute64. And when I learned to not grip the Tribute64 quite as tightly, I got used to the smaller prong size and slightly more cramped layout. The 2 added home and select buttons at the top here function as a home button when connected to the Nintendo Switch and an extra input when connected to PC or Mac. And that's definitely worth mentioning. Beyond working with the Nintendo 64, the Tribute64 can also be connected to the Nintendo Switch and USB devices using the included USB receiver. When connecting to the Nintendo 64, however, you're using this dongle, which includes a slot for a memory pack, and then there's also a small switch that lets you select between memory or rumble functionality. I guess since the original Nintendo 64 controller only allowed you one expansion device per controller, there's no way to use both at the same time. Retrobit recommends against switching between memory and rumble on the fly, and that you should instead remove the dongle, switch modes, and then reconnect. But even with the slight clunkiness of switching between the 2 modes, I love having wireless rumble. It might not mean as much to you, but I'm definitely a fan of rumble. It just makes me feel like I'm getting the full experience, even if force feedback implementation was a little heavy-handed back in the 90s. And speaking of, the rumble in the wireless Tribute64 feels really good. It's not quite as strong as the original Nintendo 64 rumble pack, but I think that's a good thing. So there you have it. I think the Tribute64 makes for a great wireless Nintendo 64 controller, but I almost wish I could sort of merge the two wireless Nintendo 64 controller options, take the body and build of the Brawler 64, but swap the buttons and sticks for those of the Tribute64, and bring over the rumble functionality as well. It's nice to have both options to choose from, but at least for now, for the feel of the buttons and stick as well as the built-in rumble, I'm going with the Tribute64 most often. I'll leave a link to the Wireless Tribute64 down in the description if you'd like to check it out for yourself, and let me know which wireless Nintendo 64 controller you prefer down in the comments. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a like on your way out and also consider subscribing. And until the next video, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.